So for the penultimate show, they invited me to come back and play like 2 or 3 songs. And I had left the band, 3-4 years earlier. And, they said, yeah, come by and play a couple songs with Joe. So with 2 drum sets on the stage. And we had a rehearsal space, and we ran through whatever the 3 songs. And then it was like, well, we still have this space for another hour. What are we going to do? And so we just started running more and more songs until it was the whole set. So our second to last show was at the Knitting Factory, and it was both me and Joe on drums the entire time. And then the very last show, I came back for a couple of songs.
Final show, was it just a couple? I guess it was like, I think we probably did 3 songs at Knitting Factory, and we probably did like 5 or something at 285 Kent, I think.
No, we did the whole set at Knitting Factory.
Yeah, did we? Okay.
We did the entire, yeah, I mean,
yeah.
That was big for me, I remember.
It was fun. And then like after we did that, when we started talking about doing stuff again, it's like, well, we've set the bar pretty high. Like I think we all thought that the farewell show was like the best thing that Parts and Labor had ever done. So where do you go from there? So at a bare minimum, we had to do this
so that we can break up again and beat that first farewell show.
That's right.
Recursively beating ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, what could be the most costly and cumbersome thing we could possibly do? And we're like 2 drum sets. Perfect.
What precisely was it about those final shows that was that needed to be recaptured so many years later?
I think this band was always trying to sound like more individuals than it was. Like from the very earliest formation, in the early days, it was Dan making these really epic rock songs out of a toy keyboard. That was like the start of Parts and Labor. And then he and I were juggling multiple instruments and drones and things, and we were working with drummers that sounded like 2 people to begin with. Like either one, Joe or Chris, on their own, sounds like a cacophony of multiple people. And so I feel like we were always striving for a bigger sound and a more chaotic sound and just larger than life. The final show was really just like, how do we take that in a retrospective? So it was every previous drummer came on stage for a few songs, and it was a very, very much like, this is everything Parts and Labor ever was. And if we were going to come back out, we want to be the epitome of what we could be.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, it's, final shows. So like we need to jam as much
Pull out the stops
into this as humanly possible. And then, and now you can pick up where you left off, and in some sense, at least.
Yeah.
I feel like
Go ahead.
Hold on, I want to throw another like reason for this in here, which is like kind of the impetus for this was a text thread during COVID, and like everybody just sort of being locked down, and the 4 of us just like joking and riffing about old bands that nobody remembers, and like tour jokes and just like that kind of shit, and just like I just missed it. I was like, this is fun, and like in December of 2020, if I want anything, it's to like be in a room with these 4 people, so we can continue to riff about bands that nobody remembers.
And when we finished up too, there was never like, it wasn't an acrimonious breakup. We weren't like, we were still talking about ideas for the next record on our last tour, like Dan, Joe, and I, before we decided like, no, let's take a break from this for a while. And we called it an extended hiatus, always leaving the door open a crack, like, maybe we'll do something someday. And that someday came.
and I it's funny you said like pull out all the stops for the last show. I feel like the work that's been done on this record and the upcoming shows is even more work than the that we put out for the last show. It's like okay, we already let's continue to pull out all the stops. It's been obscene the amount of work and effort that's gone into this.
So take me back then to that last show. I mean, what was it that what spurred the indefinite hiatus in the first place?
We wanted to do something for the 10-year anniversary of the band.
And it
But
was
also,
break up.
like on our terms, like we've done these things, and like we've all got other things we want to be doing with our lives, and let's just like go out with a bang and not, you know, not fade away. Um, yeah, that was kind of it. I mean, also like the beginning of the 2010s, like Brooklyn had changed so much since we started. And it was like, I don't know, no longer felt like we were sure. I no longer felt like I was sure of what we were adding. And it seemed like we needed to do something else that was like beyond the confines of just like continuing to do what we had been doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was getting practically difficult.
Yeah.
Joe had moved out to the West Coast. His work was blowing up.
I didn't move yet. I hadn't moved yet.
Hadn't
But
moved
my
yet.
dad was sick.
It was a lot.
Dan had gotten married and wanted to start a family,
Yep.
and we didn't make enough money to support ourselves from the band.
Yeah. Fun
That is
fact:
true.
my child was born a year to the day after the last show.
Mm.
Yeah.
I was hoping you to say like 9 months later, as though something
Yeah.
something magical had happened that night.
I guess we really didn't pull out all the stops, guys.
Jeez, man, no one's going to be beating that. 70 minutes into this podcast, and you've won it. I'm out.
This is an interesting idea, though. This idea of like not really adding anything anymore. If you can you extrapolate on that a little bit?
Yeah, especially now that there's so much less music getting released into the world every day. We thought it's time to come
This
back
is
and
the
add
time.
something important.
Yeah. What is it though? Is it like, I mean, it's corny to say, but is it like we didn't have anything specific to say about the current moment, or it was just time to try a different configuration?
I think it was a combination of things. I think it was like this band went so hard for most of its like first 10 years. Like between 2006 and 2008, we released 3 albums and 2 EPs and started a label and like did all of this stuff. And I mean, we toured the country, like we did like 6-month tours before we had a booking agent. Like we just kind of never slowed down. And then, yeah, like after 10 years, we had created so much work. I mean, to me, it felt like I was starting to hit the wall in terms of like what we could add to that body of work. And also like, like when we started, there was this thriving world of like loud, weird music everywhere, but very much in Brooklyn. And in 2011, it didn't feel that way anymore. Like there was a lot of like more hushed indie rock around us, and I felt like old and out of place at that point. That's me. How did everybody else feel?
I mean, I wasn't in the band, but I can speak to the fact that, musically, the world kind of did move on from that, from the noise punk, the early aughts noise punk movement that was happening in Brooklyn and Providence and, San Diego and the Midwest and the Bay Area and Baltimore. Baltimore was coming up with something different at that point. But, this had kind of been replaced in a lot of ways, not just by indie rock, but by, music that primarily is distributed online. And it was just a new way of doing things. And, we weren't the only, I wasn't in the band at the time, but they weren't the only band to sort of feel the brunt of that. And it's interesting because, now, it's way gone. We sound, we're coming back and there's absolutely nothing that where we fit in at all. And whereas like back then they were kind of hanging on a string, and now it's just like, well, hope you like this. Hope you like this.
I wouldn't say nothing now, but
Well, I mean,
I think.
Go ahead.
I mean, I'm just thinking back to that era. I think for me, it was more that 10-year run. Like exhausted ourselves. Like,
Yeah, I
we
think it
really
was more
didn't do a lot
personal
of
than like
breaks.
us evaluating our how we fit into the culture at large, I think.
I mean, I felt like at every step of the way, you know, I always felt a little bit out of step with whatever was trendy with this band. And I was okay with that. You know, I think we were all okay with that. I think we were just trying to do something unique and to add to the conversation. I think we had pulled on the various strings of what made Parts and Labor, and our influences, our instrumentation, to the breaking point, especially by the time that last record. And it wasn't that we were out of ideas, but I think it was just kind of like, we had tried everything for a while, and there was a lot of personal stuff in our lives and wanting to do other things. Being in a band takes a lot of time and a lot of effort that I think goes unseen for anybody who hasn't done it. And I think this band in particular, we took it very seriously and we worked very hard. So it was hard to accommodate other things alongside it.
You do have to take it seriously now, but how has your sort of relationship with that changed now that, everybody has, a lot of you have families and lives and other things? Like in what form can one take this seriously?
Well, it took us 5 years to make this record versus, and previously we would be able to crank one out in a year's time or less. I think there's a lot of, a lot of this was done remotely and in fits and starts and in free time amongst all of our busy lives and families and obligations. So that was different.
Yeah,
but also we have like technology affording that capability now more than we ever had before. Like, I think it would have been really hard to make this record in 2012 the way that we did today.
You find different ways to like pour the same amount of creative energy into the project. Like, instead of getting in the van for several months out of the year, we never took 5 years to make a record before. And I feel like it feels like a record that earns those 5 years. It's like a double album. It's sonically dense and diverse, and like, yeah. That's how you make it work, when you're at a different place in terms of responsibilities and like where you're at in life, for sure.
I think when it's no longer the primary creative outlet, then it alleviates some of the pressure that leads to like the emotional labor of being in a band being more difficult. Like, we all came around to being closer friends over the last 15 years. And we were able to carry that into this situation because we're not like out there in a van together 6 months out of the year, thankfully.
Yeah, and trying to like hopefully turn it into something that could supplement our lives or like, make some income. I think we've all got different commitments and sources of income now, so that pressure was off a little bit. But we also said from the get-go, even in those early text threads, that like, well, let's just see how it goes. We didn't start this out like, let's make a record. We started out like, let's see what happens and let's start like throwing some ideas around. And if it's good enough and we're all excited about it, then let's take it to the next level. And we took it step by step in that way. So I think previously when we were in a band and we were committed to going on tour and doing all the things, is like, let's put out a record to put out a record. And this was more like, let's see what happens out of that friendship and our shared ideas and what we want to make together. And then if it's worth putting out, we'll put it out. But we were also like, I think all aligned from the get-go, where we're like, if this sucks, we're not putting out. We don't want to like come back out of the woodworks after 15 years and put something that doesn't hold true to what this band did previously, what we want to hear in music. And so it took a lot to get here, but I don't know. I'll speak for myself. I'm pretty proud of it.
I had fun.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask like what took 5 years, but it sounds like at first it was because there were no expectations that this thing was going to even come out. So maybe it was something you were working on, like as you said, in fits and starts and in your free time. And at what point did it actually really congeal into a clear project? And
maybe when we all got together in the studio, because at that point we had demos of all the songs, so the album's shape was starting to reveal itself to us, and then we were all physically in the same place, which is, I think, what made it feel real on an emotional level.
But you and Chris had gotten together once before that too, and I think that was starting to like show the the promise of just like recording the 2 drum kits together, and we were experimenting with those sounds, right?
Yeah. But this was the first time we were all in the room with one another, probably since the last show.
That's interesting. So the 2 drummers got together independent of the band?
Well, the 2 drummers live in LA, and then BJ lives in North Carolina and Dan lives in New York. So it was more practical for us to get together. And Chris and I would go to movies together and stuff before the idea of getting the band back together came about. So,
Can you tell them where we jammed for that session, the 2 of us?
Yeah, we went to the Foo Fighters studio because I was working on some other projects over there, and so we grabbed a day over there and did some drum experimentation. And the studio is sort of oriented around recording drums, so it's a great place for that kind of thing.
What does that mean when you say drum experimentation? I mean, obviously, like, there are different considerations when you're coming in with 2 drummers, but I mean, how did you initially kind of work through that?
I think it was a lot of times just, switching off. Like Joe would come up with something and I would follow him or play off it. And then I would come up with something and Joe would play off it. And, and then we'd listen back and we'd repeat what sounds good and trash what didn't sound good.
Yeah, it's kind of like in James Brown's band, Jabbo had a lane and Clyde had a lane, except we're not nearly as good as either of those guys.
There's also, I think, some of the early demos. I mean, Dan and I were definitely experimenting with, well, what can we do with this palette with these 2 drummers? And having spent so much time independently with Chris and Joe playing to their strengths, song to song, and playing on top of each other. And there's like a demo version of the first track on the album, and I was just imagining one person doing like these steady pulses and one person just freaking the fuck out. And so I was just like, I took like a MIDI drum kit and I was just like mashing my hands all over the keyboard to like simulate one of them doing a free jazz freak out. And there's a lot of just like kind of just making some sort of guideposts of what it could sound like. But then inevitably things changed and were reconfigured. And once you actually have Chris and Joe making their own beats and collaborating with one another, a lot of the rhythmic sounds that ended up on the record were taking the demos and then figuring it out in the studio and like, okay, well, how do we put these pieces together and how do you have 2 drum kits playing alongside one another? Definitely a process.
The beginning of this conversation, like the 5 years at the beginning of the creation of this album, was that the first time that you had all really had a conversation like this in earnest about doing something like this again?
I don't think we even went this far, like DJ was saying, we were kind of just feeling it out. And the conversation started out of COVID-induced desire to connect with old friends again. So it kind of it was born out of friendship, and then, hey, joking about, playing together again. And then, maybe our subconscious is trying to tell us that we actually want to try this. So kind of just gently getting into it.
I mean, these guys will be humble about it, but like, I wasn't in the band. I wasn't in the band in 2012. I was a guest. And, to get invited back into the band, like, that was huge for me. Like, I was over the moon about the whole thing. That's true.
Yeah, let's talk about it, Chris. Let's talk about that, Chris. What happened there?
A couple things. I mean, a couple things happened. Oh, so I left the band, was it 2007 or 2008?
2007.
So 2007.
Like everybody else remembers.
I left the band in 2007. I had the bright idea that I was going to start a career in music journalism, which is one of my more terrible ideas, as that has sort of shown its worth as of late. But I wanted to focus more on my career than being in a band, and I went and started that a blog called Paper Thin Walls with with some investors, and I joined a business model that was called Paper Thin Walls, and if it had actually done what it was supposed to do, it would have been Bandcamp years early, but we never got to that.
You also wrote a book.
And I wrote a book. I wrote a 33 and a third book. And I wanted to
and
focus.
You were an editor at Rolling Stone too.
Well, that was later. That was much later. But
I mean, you kind of did do like music writing, though. Is what
also, you're describing this in such a way that you like left something incredibly lucrative and went to the.
Well, no,
you went from one thing that was not lucrative to another thing that was not lucrative.
No, honestly,
out of the frying pan into the other frying pan.
To be perfectly honest, like I went to something that I was good at and made me money, from something I was good at and was like flushing money down the toilet every year. I don't know if I ever saw anything beyond the occasional sad ASCAP check from being in parts and labor. And I was living off music writing. I lived off it for 18 years. Yeah. Like either way, it's a creative outlet that, I'm going to be creative and I'm going to live off it. And that was what I went with.
And so much of the touring life when you were in the band, though, was a grind because you were sitting in the passenger seat, like on like deadlines and writing stuff every day. You were in the tour band writing and working your day job essentially while on the road, that's a lot.
A terrible idea because, and again, like it kept me in my day job, but it's like, my memories of Paris, France are sitting in a internet cafe. Updating the site. Like it's not, I don't have the memories I would have liked to have from that point in my life, but, it is what it is, and also like musically, like, I was told at one point, that, look, we're still playing these medium to tiny venues. We auditioned for Jaguar in a pizza parlor, and, my kind of, let's say, I don't take kindly to dynamics, and I like to, I'm not a big fan of dynamics, and I like to, I like to play where it's physical and aggressive, and the volume level was just, people in these tiny venues are just like, yeah, why am I getting blown out of this room, by this band I've never heard of? And, they suggested to me for the next record, like, we want to kind of take it down a notch. And my reaction was like, why would I want to do that? And meanwhile, I look back and like, I think the first half of Receivers is the best thing that band ever did, with Joe in the driver's seat on side A of that record. Like, it's like, man, I kind of wish part of me kind of wishes I did, learn to tone it down a little bit. But, at the time I was just like, no, like, I'm here to rock. I'm going to pay attention to the band around me. I'm going to be musical and listen to other people and other things that are happening in the sonic.
I mean, listening to what you're saying here makes me think that the four of us should make a record together sometime.
As I was saying to Chris before everybody else got on, like, Dan, you and I have known each other for a very long time now, and we met initially because of your day job at the time is that you were working reception at the Onion offices. So what was everybody doing around that time? I mean, that was a good gig for you, right? Because you could actually like leave and go on tour for an extended period and come back.
Yeah. I mean, the writing staff of the Onion bought me a guitar for my birthday. Like, they were supportive, like, as much as any day job could be. And I love those guys. It was great. I left them eventually because we were touring so much that it reached the point where they were like, you can't do this anymore. And
people were just walking into the office.
I mean, there was an early Parts and Labor tour where We've told this story many times, but we did our first trip to South by Southwest. We killed 2 vans. The van that we owned died. We bought another van. That one died. And we ended up renting a van from the Oklahoma City airport and driving straight home from there to York. And I just went to the office that morning and like slept on the couch. You remember the couch? Yeah, I slept on that couch for like an hour, and then like started work the next day. And like
It was literally Dan and I switching off for 36 hours or whatever it was from Oklahoma City straight to New York and sleeping when you weren't driving. And then I remember dropping you off and then returning the rental van. And that was it.
yeah, so like 2005, like it just it was no longer sustainable. 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, we were just on tour all the fucking time. So it was the right move. But that was a sweet ass job.
Yeah. So BJ, what were you doing at the time?
Yeah. So, I mean, going further back when I moved to New York, I had a really lousy temp job to start, but then I started working at the knitting factory, which is where I met Dan. And that job paid shit. And the only way that it could work is your nightlife was at least covered because you could drink for free at the bar and get to see all the shows. So that was where I hung out, and that's what I did for fun.
So many good shows.
So many good shows. Really amazing time. But after I burnt out pretty quickly working at the knitting factory, and I'd kind of felt fairly jaded about, working. I saw a lot of artists mistreated in a way that I was just kind of like, I don't want to be a part of this.
You saw the sausage get made.
Yeah, very much so. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had a friend who was like, hey, you heard of the internet? You're good with computers. And I had like worked with computers my whole life. I taught myself how to do web development, and I was a freelance web developer for the entire time that the band was in operation. So like we would go on tour and I'd come back and I'd hustle for a freelance job and work doing web development stuff. And then, got on the road, got broke, came back and just rinse and repeat for 10 years. When the band finished up, I started doing that more seriously. And so that's what I've been doing full time since, is just doing, working for various web technology companies, coding.
This is something I had to sort of work through in my own life, is when I got to a point where I was like actually doing a little bit better, was to not romanticize too hard those moments in my life when I was living in like absolute squalor. Like, and you come back from it, you look back in hindsight, and obviously like, you've got some great stories, but like, at the end of the day, it sounds like it was a pretty tough go of it.
It was hard, but I don't want to speak for these guys. I don't think I'm like going at it like even, less hard these days with all the things I'm trying to do in life. I think we all live pretty fully in terms of the things that we're trying to do. And I don't want to like over characterize it and say that I lived in squalor in those days in Brooklyn, because I was
speaking for myself, just for the record, but yeah.
BJ,
I mean, like it was like,
BJ, if I may interrupt, didn't you for a time live in a building that had no shower?
Oh, sure. That's not squalor. Could be worse. No, I mean, I lived in a warehouse space with other roommates that had been like converted old factory in Williamsburg, but had the luck to have moved there right before things got really crazy and gentrified and expensive. And we also, we stopped paying our rent increases and just kept paying the same amount as when we had signed the lease in 1999. So, even by the time I left New York in around the same time that Chris had left the band in 2007, 2008, I was still paying the same amount of rent that I had paid for almost 10 years and, around $600 and change a month. So find ways of making things work too, amidst a very crazy and not traditional schedule, being on the road a lot.
I feel like we shouldn't do the day job roundtable without mentioning Joe's pretty cool day job.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, like, we alluded to this a little bit before about, that, I mean, that you obviously, like, you've been able to maintain a career in music, and it sounds like maybe sort of like towards the end of that band is when I mean, you're sitting, we're not using the video, but you're sitting like in a production studio right now as we're speaking.
Yeah, I started scoring films when I was 23. I grew up in Milwaukee and then lived in some other places. And then when I was back in Milwaukee after a band didn't work out, I reconnected with some old friends, and there were some folks in Milwaukee that were part of this experimental film community, and then also some great documentary filmmakers. So I kind of just, through weird, unlikely circumstances, found myself scoring films from the time I was in my early 20s. And, I think I got paid $600 for that first film, but it got a theatrical release. And so it got my foot in the door. And at the time I was working with a partner, and we would score ads, which would allow us to then score our friends' films for next to nothing. And so, yeah, I think during my tenure in Parts and Labor, let's see, I got my first couple television show projects, and things were starting to pick up. And then I moved to Los Angeles, shortly after the band broke up in 2012.
But you were also similar to Chris. You were working from the road a ton too. So like, I remember like you taking calls when we're like finishing a sound check, and you'd have to like go off and like, send files or get feedback and talk to your partners and stuff.
Yeah. And I would like write musical ideas on a MIDI keyboard on my laptop. I remember we were like in Europe, and I would work all night long taking notes from people in the States. But it was, I was young, and it was fun.
There are a lot of things that you can do in your 20s, and one of them is ride around in a van in the country and be in a band. And like, obviously, like that, it gets significantly harder as you get older and as life starts to happen. Although Dan, like you have like, I mean, we were talking about the cadence of albums that Parts and Labor was putting out, and it doesn't strike me that you've like particularly slowed down much at all in that time.
Well, you touched earlier on like, how do you continue to have creative output as you get older and have a family, job, all that stuff. And my solution to that has been to tour less and record more, and just like, dive into the process of just like writing a lot of music and cranking that out. I'm like, fortunately, like having Thrill Jockey on board to put that stuff out has definitely made things easier. And I have a little studio in the basement where I can do a lot of that work. Yeah, I think I've done, as of this year, I think I'll have 9 records on Thrill Jockey since Parts and Labor broke up, which feels like a fairly productive era of parenthood. I was thinking about listening to everybody talk about what they've been up to and like day jobs and stuff like that, and like the decision to start up the band and like the 4-piece. And like there's a big aspect of it where it's like everybody has been doing cool, interesting things in the meantime, and those have created this sort of like supergroup vibe of like going back in where like, shout out to BJ here for, in addition to doing so much songwriting, like taking on a lot of the technical aspects of the recording, and really like producing the shit out of it. And like, Chris's knowledge of music has only expanded, and like Joe has done like, so many musically great things in the last, 15 years. To like bring all of those things back in together, I think has created a Parts and Labor that is like, I don't know, just like richer and like has like so many more influences that you can like feel in there and pull out of it in a way that makes me really proud.
Again, we're talking about the 5 years that it took, and I was going to ask previously, like, okay, well, you didn't have to put out a double album. You could have spent less time, and it could have come out earlier. But yeah, well, that's what. Yeah, clearly you do, and it strikes me that like if you were going to do this, like you were really going to do this as much as you could possibly do this.
This band doesn't do half measures. We never have. And I don't think any of us approach our lives doing half measures either. But yeah, the double album kind of emerged out of just, I think, the wealth of ideas. Frankly, we have a triple album in terms of like songs and demos, or like even more that was left on the floor. like this was the condensed version of what this record could have been, and also has a lot of the themes that emerged too. Like a lot of the lyrics Dan was writing was about community building and imagining utopias and imagining the ideal state of things. And a lot of things I was thinking about was just repetition and duality and things repeating and coming back. And there's a lot of like our songs about the experience of writing this record, but also about just our obsessions that we've been thinking about in the intervening years and in current time. But like there's just a really nice duality to all of it. It's the two eras of the longest eras of the band together. It's the double drummers. It's a double album. Things happening in twos throughout it. Both conceptually and practically.
Community. I mean, obviously, we were talking about Brooklyn and the role that played in the band, but to a certain extent, the reunion really came out of COVID and isolation and people not being out there and touring and seeing each other. But BJ, like one of the things that you've been doing in the meantime that's incredibly interesting to me is like you have this artist in residency up there. So it strikes me that like that is a thing that you have continued to do, is try to at very least like get creative people in a place together.
So I moved to North Carolina in 2015 to Chapel Hill, and my partner Maria and I had long been talking about this idea of, if we're going to set up shop somewhere and land somewhere, and we wanted to be outside of the cities and own some property and garden and farm and have a lot of space. But we had this idea of being a hub and where people could come to work and to work on their creative ideas. And so we started Level in 2015, and it initially started off with just like we knew some people here when we moved, but we hadn't really been a part of this community yet. But we knew a lot of folks from where we had lived, and she had lived in Chicago and I had lived in Brooklyn, and we were both living in New Jersey for a while. We knew all of these artists from around the country in our travels and lives together, and we're like, oh, we should bring them here and sort of share in their experiences and foster conversations with local artists and folks from outside of the community. And when we moved here, we didn't feel like there was a lot of support for the kind of art and experience that we cared about, which is more DIY, experimental, conceptual, weirder. It felt like a lot of folks were getting pushed out of Chapel Hill to the, like a lot of smaller towns, things were getting more expensive. So artists were finding it harder to find space and to do things. And since then, it's actually become more vibrant, and there's a lot of other community spaces and people working similarly here. But yeah, we've been doing it for 10 years now, and we just got through a series of 3 local artist residencies, and we're going to have we did 2, and we have another one upcoming this month. And it's been wild. But the artists come and stay on our property in a old cabin that was a former Boy Scout cabin, like one of the first Boy Scout troop cabins in Chapel Hill, that we've converted. And we have goats and chickens and a small farm and a bit of, land outside of Chapel Hill so folks can decompress from whatever their day-to-day situation is like and just focus on working on a project creatively.
And then Dan, you're kind of the last man standing in Brooklyn at this point. Is that right?
I think there are other people here still.
Yeah. Of this group,
yeah.
Though, and I again, I want to get back to this idea of community and what you're thinking about and what that means to you, especially in this sort of, awful, horrible, just shitty, just garbage moment. But also, it strikes me that so much of, what is ill and wrong and bad in the world has come out of a lot of the isolation that all of us have been experiencing.
Yeah, I would say that's true. I mean, I gotta say, I'm kind of feeling Brooklyn and New York right now. It's having a cool mayor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Astoria guy, yeah.
What's that?
Astoria guy, one of my people.
Yeah. I don't know. It feels good around here in a way that it didn't for a while, like going into COVID and coming out of COVID in terms of just like, I don't know, going to shows. Still go to a lot of shows. I feel very lucky to be able to do that, and to still be here. And
You've been hosting shows too, like your
yeah,
series at Mama
I
Tried.
do a monthly series at a venue called Mama Try. So I'm in Sunset Park, which is not like a live venue hub, but there are a couple of really amazing places. And Mama Tried is a place that really started doing shows in early 2021. It was one of the first like regular venues that people started going to coming out of COVID, because they have this amazing backyard and all the shows are free. And they would open up this gate, so you didn't even have to go through the bar. And I remember going out to one of the regulars at the bar, was Robbie Coltrane. And he, when he's not playing at Blue Note and stuff like that, he would just bring his band down and play these free outdoor shows. And it was just totally transcendent to like be back at a show and like hearing this amazing band and be around people again. And like the community that has come out of that era at Mama Tried is really amazing. And it's like neighborhood bar, but all free shows. I do outdoor afternoon shows is my series. So it's like a lot of kids and like families coming through too. And the first one is going to be Editrix, which is Wendy Eisenberg's rock band, which I'm a huge fan. The stuff that they've been doing around town for the last 5 years has been amazing. So like one example of like players that I think are really interesting and doing cool shit in Brooklyn right now.
And Joe and Chris, you it sounds like you've both been out in LA for a long time. Were you able to find that sense of community out there?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll go first, Chris, since I moved out here before you. But when I moved to LA, Parts and Labor had recently broken up, and I started playing with a guitarist called Marnie Stern, who was still in New York. And during that time, I was starting to feel like I might be in a loveless marriage with music. It was something that had been central to my identity since I was very young. I'd been touring long before I joined Parts and Labor, and it just felt like I wasn't experiencing joy when I was playing anymore, even though I love Marnie and I love her music. So I was trying to figure out what was happening, if other artists had ever felt that before, if I needed to move on and try something else with my life. And so, like anybody in that era, I started a podcast called The Trap Set, which was about drummers and the existential. I was like working through my own existential dread with them. But that became a big community for me. That was one community. And then
I saved a lot on therapy during the pandemic by having a podcast. It's been very helpful.
That's what it is. But I think by doing that, not only did I hear from other folks that I, worshipped that they had gone through similar periods, but it rekindled my love of music and enabled me to start making records of my own, which is sort of what I ultimately figured out is like, okay, I've been a kindergarten teacher for a long time, but what I really want to do is have my own kids. That's kind of the analogy I think of. Like, okay, I'm helping other people as a composer or as a drummer realize their vision as songwriters or creative people, but what I really want is to make my own statement. And so that's the podcast kind of served as a bridge to that. But I'd say the great thing about LA is there isn't just one community. There's so many different communities, and I kind of tried to seek out musicians from different generations, different backgrounds, different styles, and I like kind of being a hub for those different folks, and then it's kind of expanded into the way that I approach my life. But music is one of the great things about music is that it's an innately social art form. So unlike being a novelist or something, you kind of need other people to do it. And so I feel like this has been a great place for me to do that.
That's interesting, Joe. So you hadn't really considered putting yourself out there in that way until you had those conversations?
I think there was part of me that wanted to, but was afraid. Yeah. I think I was talking about it a little bit when I was in the band too, like, oh, someday maybe I'll make an album, but
And Dan was like, no.
No, Dan. I actually remember talking to Dan about it. Dan and Ty, and you guys were like, "Yeah, you should try that."
Yeah,
but I couldn't take the first step. I just didn't. I was stuck. I was kind of stuck creatively, and now I just recognize it as like a stop in a larger pattern where things come and go, and subsequent to that, if I feel that feeling again, it's not as paralyzing. It's just like, okay, what is this trying to tell me? Maybe I need to change my approach or look at things through a different lens.
Yeah. And Chris, judging by your background, you are a kindergarten teacher?
No, I'm a dad in Culver City and still figuring it out. Still figuring everything out.
Just life,
yeah. I mean, just and where I fit in to it. So I'm still.
Well, this is probably helping, right? I mean, this is kind of shaking things up a little bit for you.
Oh, I mean, I will say, I got laid off from Rolling Stone in 2019, and having been a music writer for 18 years, the biggest blow was to my sense of self-worth. Like, this is what I do. This is who I am. When I was 8 years old, I was watching MTV 8 hours a day. Like, this is my personhood. And so, the hardest part of it, it's I certainly don't miss working there, but what I miss is, being able to, kind of live my personhood. And the hardest part of the whole thing was just having to realize, like, oh, like, I'm not, Chris Weingarten, music journalist. I'm Chris Weingarten, boring suburban dad, and that's okay. But it was a hard thing to realize.
Yeah. I mean, people tell you shouldn't be,
you were boring.
Chris said he was boring.
My therapist.
Yeah, I obviously, like, you shouldn't define yourself too much by your job, but like, it's nice to do if you get to do what you've wanted to do your entire life.
If you do what you love, and it's like, I still, get in, I'm still incredibly passionate about it, and I'm constantly, learning new things and taking in new things, and the getting in arguments and analyzing, and that never stops. That's what I do for fun, much to my family's chagrin. But it's just the difference is now I kind of got to do it for free.
Yeah, but I remember at first you found that to be freeing, when you started doing other work, and then you didn't have to have an opinion about some pop record.
That's it. Where it's like, now when the new Geese record drops or the new Olivia Rodrigo, it's like, it's not my job to know what that sounds like anymore. So yes, I could sit home and, get deep into Derek Bailey or, get deep into Japanese hardcore, and kind of,
or get Eviction to play the San Francisco show with us.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, like, I mainly go to noise shows out here and, get deep, I don't, I'm not going to get in free to see, I don't know, 9 Inch Nails or whatever, but, I can pay $15 to watch, Victoria smash the wall of a club with a mic, or the axe mic with a contact mic.
This is still really kind of early days for all of this, but BJ kind of alluded to this being
5 years.
Well, yeah, it's been.
Yeah, what's another
years.
hour, man? Come on.
No. Early days, obviously, of getting started again. But BJ alluded to the kind of the triple album that became a double album. So it sounds like you've the material is there. I mean, is this something that you foresee living beyond this moment?
I mean, first we got to figure out how to play all this stuff live, and then
Yep.
and then get
Okay.
to. I mean, that's the next step is just putting a very dense record on stage and recreating it. So that's going to be a whole other life of this record and these songs, is recontextualize them for the live shows, and then we'll see.
I think a lot of the pain that we experienced during the first go round was due to having expectations that didn't comport with reality. And I think now we have the wisdom not to have those expectations. Just let it happen.
or any expectation.
That's not to say that people aren't working really hard and trying to make something as good as it possibly can be, but like minimizing the expectations as far as how it might be received and all the implications there. And
I remember being in the studio, in the studio setup. We're just hanging out. I'm just like, man, all this record needs to do for me to be happy is to like, take off enough where we can do this again. Like where we could just come back to this, where we can hang and make music again, because this is so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like, I think I said this at some point during the end of Parts and Labor. I was like, there's just this nagging feeling when we finished that the business was unfinished, that we, like, the songs I'd written, like tremendous pride for everything we've accomplished. And I love all of our records and I love the music that we've made, but there's always like a next level, just like kind of percolating a sound to get out. And I said to these guys that as we were finishing the record, I was like, if nobody puts this out and nobody cares, I don't care, because I made a record that I really love. Like I really still like listening to this record, even with the number of times that I've listened to it and working on it. And there's records that I have in my life that I'm still going back to year after year and coming back to, and just making this in as uncompromising way as possible, and just being the best thing that these four people could make. That was what was most important. I feel like we nailed that.